Hello folks, and welcome to another episode of Zesty Steel. This time we're going to be tackling a vegan stir fry. A friend of mine challenged me to make a vegan recipe, and this is what I came up with. So without further ado, let's begin. We're going to press the moisture out of some tofu with some paper towels and a pot. Now I put a little too much pressure with my pan, and it got a little crumbly, as you can see by its craggly edges. We'll start by chopping the tofu into large chunks. Try and get them as even as you can, although it isn't the biggest deal if they're uneven like mine are. I'm aiming for 1-inch cubes, that way when we fry these up, it'll be nice and crispy on the outside while being soft in the middle. Next we're going to bread the tofu before frying it. I'm using 2 parts flour to 1 part cornstarch. The cornstarch helps the tofu get extra crispy on the outside. So give this a little bit of a mix, and then start rolling your tofu around in the mixture until it's thoroughly covered. Then we're going to heat about 2 tablespoons of canola oil in our pan until it's shimmering. Next we're going to add our tofu and start frying. Now again, as you can see, my tofu is pretty uneven and crumbly, so it's kind of falling apart. It isn't too much of a big deal because we're going to crisp up all these edges and no one's really going to notice after it's in our stir fry. We're going to rotate our tofu until it's crispy on all sides. You can use your sword to help you do this. We're going to fry the tofu in batches, that way we don't overcrowd our pan. After we're done frying our tofu, it's time to move on to veggies. So I'm starting with my broccoli, and I'm going to try and cut it into tiny little bite-sized pieces. Now that our broccoli's chopped, it's time we move on to dicing an onion. Now we want this onion to be chopped up nice and fine, that way we don't have any large onion bits in our final dish. We're then going to crush a few garlic cloves. Crushing garlic cloves make them significantly easier to peel. So after our garlic is peeled, we're then going to chop it up into fine little bits, before moving on to our pepper. Now I'm chopping my pepper into long, thin strips. That way they're large enough to still have a little bit of crunch after they're finished cooking. It doesn't really matter what color pepper you use, and in fact this dish is best made with whatever leftover veggies you have in the fridge. After we're done chopping our pepper, we're going to move on to our baby bok choy. Now be careful with bok choy, as it has a lot of grit inside of it, so you need to wash it very well. Now the stalks of the bok choy are very tough, so we're going to chop them nice and fine, that way they cook quickly. After we're done with our stalks, it's time we move on to the baby bok choy leaves. Now these, we don't need to chop nearly as fine. After our leaves are all chopped up, it's time we move on to our green onion. Now this is just going to be used as a garnish at the end. Now that our veggies are prepped, it's time we get to cooking them. We're going to start with 1 tablespoon of canola oil, and then we're going to add our onion and fry it until it's translucent. Then we're going to add our garlic and cook for another minute before adding our bok choy stalks. Again, we're adding these early so they have enough time to cook. After another 2 minutes, we're going to add our peppers and our broccoli. We're going to give it a good stir with our sword, and then add about 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. Now the purpose of the soy sauce here is actually to help us steam our veggies, so we're going to put the lid on to prevent steam from escaping. After letting our veggies steam for about 2 minutes, we're going to add our baby bok choy leaves. Once again, we're going to give it a good stir to make sure that soy sauce is coating all our veggies. Then we're going to add our top again, and cook for another 2 minutes. Next we're going to add our tofu. From now on, we're cooking with the top off to try and keep our tofu from getting soggy. We spent all that time keeping it nice and crispy, and it would be a shame to lose that nice outer crust. We're going to give the tofu a nice mix with our sword, before adding another 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. We're then going to add some optional flavor enhancers. I'm using some white and black sesame seeds, as well as some crushed seaweed flakes. Now each of these are optional, but the great thing about stir fry is that you can customize it as you please. You could add curry powder or fish sauce, maybe some ginger powder or turmeric. Use whatever you please and experiment with the flavors. Now here your stir fry can be done and ready to serve. I like mine with rice, so I'm going to add a few cups of rice left over from last night's meal. Starting with cold rice is a great cheat to avoid adding excess moisture to your dish. Now you'll see I'm covering my stir fry here for a moment, but that's only to make sure I don't slosh everything out. Now if you can't tell by now, I really like soy sauce, so I'm going to add about another tablespoon, and then we're going to season with some pepper and salt. We're going to give it one last stir with our sword to make sure everything's incorporated before we serve. Add your green onions at the end for a nice little garnish and for some extra oniony flavor. Now this stir fry tastes incredible. The umami from the seaweed and sesame seeds is offset by our strong onion flavors of the green onion and the bok choy. The tofu is crispy on the outside and soft in the middle. I'd say this recipe is a huge success and proof that vegan cooking can be tasty. I hope you guys use this recipe as some inspiration for what you can do with your stir fry. Use whatever you have left over in the fridge and go wild with some of the flavors.